Hi there, everybody, and welcome to our second SAC for the People's DA Candidate Forum. We're very excited to welcome everyone and both of our candidates, Alana Mathews and Thien, to this forum today. We would also like to thank everyone who is attending and taking some time out of what is a totally gorgeous Saturday to put some focus on voter education and the importance of this race in our community. This is a reminder that this is a nonpartisan 501c3 event. The coalition's goal here is to educate voters and provide awareness. Coalition members do not endorse or oppose either candidate. Here are just a few logistical details that we're going to run through before we get started with the questions and answers. Translation for today's event is available for Spanish speakers. At the bottom of your screen, you can click on the small globe that you'll see there, and there is an option for Spanish. Each of these announcements will be explained in Spanish as well. And now our Spanish viewers will hear those instructions explained to them from Carlos Montes Ponce.
Hola y bienvenidos a nuestro segundo foro de candidatos al puesto de fiscal hecho por SAC for the People. Estamos muy emocionados de dar la bienvenida a ambos candidatos, Alana Mathews y Thien. También nos gustaría agradecer a todos los que asistieron y se tomaron el tiempo de su fin de semana para asistir a este foro y que recordarles que esto es un evento que se llama 501C3, no partidista. El objetivo de la coalición es educar a los votantes y crear conciencia. No se respalda ni se opone a ninguno de los candidatos. Aquí hay algunos detalles logísticos antes de comenzar. La traducción para el evento de hoy está disponible para hispanohablantes. En la parte inferior de la pantalla puede hacer clic en el icono del globo pequeño y hay una opción para español. Cada uno de estos anuncios se ha explicado y ahora nuestros televidentes en español, por favor, sigan esas instrucciones para poder escuchar el foro en español. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Carlos. For everybody, again, welcome. My name is Sonseeahray Tonsall. I'm the anchor of Fox 40 News at 11. You can come and visit me weekdays at 11 a.m. One of the reasons I really believe in news is because information is power, and it gives everybody an equal choice to make decisions about their lives. We're providing information today, so this is why I definitely wanted to be involved in this event. Again, closed captioning available. You can click on the CC icon that is on the bottom of your screen. If at any point during the program you have a logistical question, you can type into the Q&A feature also located at the bottom of your screen. Your question will be answered promptly by one of our SAC for the People team members. This program is being recorded and will be shared on the SAC for the People Facebook page and on YouTube, so you can listen to all of these answers again. The first 5 preset questions that will be asked today have been provided to the candidates ahead of time. They are preset audience questions that have been sourced from community members. Please note, for the audience questions, we will be prioritizing the questions that were submitted ahead of time through the registration form. We have designated a time at the end of our program for live audience questions. At any point, though, you can submit a question for consideration using that same Q&A feature we just ran through a little bit earlier. The live questions will be filtered by the SAC for the People team. When submitting questions for the live question portion of today's event, please remember to, again, use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and keep the topic related to racial equity and restorative justice, which is our focus today. Again, this is a nonpartisan event, and as such, we are unable to ask questions that are directed toward a particular candidate. The audience questions will be asked from the perspective of the community, but the people who pose the questions will remain anonymous. We will now start with opening statements today from our candidates. And Alana Mathews, let's start with you.
Thank you. You know, I grew up in an area that was defined by high crime, gang violence, gun violence, homicides, rapes, and robberies. It was one of the murder capitals of this country. It was so bad that one of the few places my parents allowed me to hang out was with my youth group at my pastor's house. And one day when we were doing just that in the front yard, laughing and joking, a lowrider drove past us, we didn't think anything of it until it slammed on its brakes, the tire screeched, it backed up, and it opened fire. It was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. not knowing if I should duck or if I should run, not knowing if the shooter is going to keep shooting or stop, not knowing if my next breath could be my last. Fortunately for me, I survived, but I learned that I may not be safe no matter where I am in the city. And my parents told me the only way to a better, safer life is to get good grades and go to college. So I listened. I was an honor student, a Girl Scout class president 3 times. And in 1990, I had an opportunity to go to a college preparatory school. So I left home at 16 to start a bright new future. Unfortunately, that was disrupted one day when I decided to go for a walk. And I was accosted by a truckload of guys who called me the N-word, the B-word, and got out of their truck and tried to attack me. I ran back to campus, out of breath, in tears, told the administrators what happened to me, and their response was, "You shouldn't have been walking alone." I share those 2 stories because they taught me 2 lessons. Number 1, I may not be safe no matter where I live. And number 2, the criminal justice system may not be available to me because the police were not called in either instance, not even an incident report was filed. I'm running for Sacramento District Attorney because I believe people ought to feel safe no matter where they live, work, and raise their family. And I also believe that the criminal justice system ought to be available to them, to everybody, all the time, but it's not. We have normalized crime against certain types of victims and in certain neighborhoods, and critical opportunities to keep our communities safe have been missed or ignored. That's why we're seeing such a spike in violent crime. We're seeing an epidemic of homelessness and mental health and substance abuse issues. So it is time for leadership to bring solutions to our rising problem of crime. And I am the leader who can do that because I have the broad and diverse experience, whether it's being a former prosecutor holding violent and serious offenders accountable, whether it's being an executive leader in an agency, whether it's being in a classroom as a professor who's bringing the law school classroom into the community, or whether it's being at the Capitol where I was a chief consultant providing important oversight to critical programs, investments, and policies. I will deal with this problem by prioritizing gun violence, violence against women, as well as looking for effective solutions to handle low-level offenders experiencing homelessness, substance abuse, or mental illness. Thank you.
All righty, I just want to remind everybody that these segments will be timed. We do have a timekeeper, so you may hear them interrupting and reminding the candidates of that at any moment. And now the opening statement from Thien Ho.
47 years ago today, South Vietnam fell to the communist North. 47 years today, when the North came in, they arrested my uncle who worked for the South Vietnamese government. 47 years earlier today, without a judge, without a jury, without a prosecutor, they sentenced my uncle to a re-education camp in the jungle where he was tortured for 7 years. And a year afterwards, in 1976, my family and myself escaped Vietnam on a tiny fishing boat. We were trying to make it to the Philippines, to freedom. We were just drifting on the ocean, out of gas, out of food, out of water, until we were rescued by a merchant ship and taken to a refugee camp in Malaysia, where I spent 6 months. We were sponsored to the US, and when we landed on these beautiful shores, we didn't have a bed to sleep on, so we found a mattress somebody threw away, and that's what we slept on, the 4 of us. I know what it's like to be poor. I know what it's like to learn English as a second language by watching cartoons and going to ESL class. I know what it's like to be a victim of a crime, of a drive-by shooting and attempted home invasion robbery by gang members. 22 years after landing in this country, I graduated from law school here in Sacramento. I've been a prosecutor for 20 decades, and I'm running for DA because my family has experienced the suffocating and searing pain of injustice. And I believe that justice is a right, an essential right that is owed to everybody, to all communities and to all people. And it must be equal and just to all, to both the victim of a crime and to the person accused of a crime. I have the experience in the courtroom, the executive room, the classroom, and the Capitol to take this job and do it well and to serve all communities. And today, I am asking for your support. Thank you.
All righty, those are the opening statements for both of our candidates. Now we're going to move on to the 5 preset questions that the candidates were able to review submitted by the community. Because Alana started with our opening statements, Thien, we're going to start with you. I will not be repeating the questions, so we can preserve as much time as possible to get in as many questions as possible. So everybody pay attention. According to a recent report from the ACLU of Northern California, the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office filed approximately 98,000 charges between 2017 and 2018. Although Black people represent just 11% of Sacramento County residents, they represent 28% of people criminally charged by the DA's office. What do you think is the cause of this racial disparity, and what is your specific plan to address these racial disparities? Thien?
As somebody who's personally experienced racism, as somebody who has personally experienced hate, as someone who has personally experienced the inequities of life, and as somebody who has experienced injustice in their family, I'm keenly aware that a system of justice, a system, whether it's a system of justice, whether it's a medical healthcare system, whether it's a system of government, needs to be free from bias, discrimination, and prejudice. And the inequities that we have in our criminal justice system is reflected by the inequities systemically that we have in our society. And so one of the things that we need to do and continue to do is training, making sure that there is no bias, that making sure that there is no prejudice. And so at the DA's office, we have implicit bias training that every single prosecutor, whether you're a supervisor or a new attorney, has to go through, that is being put on by the Museum of Tolerance. But in addition to that, though, I've worked with different organizations in the community, and one of which is the Wellness Foundation. And they have a training program, an education program that deals with and talks about the intergenerational toxicity and the trauma that people from different communities, especially communities of color, experience on a daily basis, on a generational basis. And that is training that we're working on to bring to the DA's office. And it's important to have that training so that when we look at a file, when we look at a case, it's not a name, and it's not just a name or a number, but there's a person on the other side, and to take into consideration all the things that go into the life experiences of that person, so that we can have a system that is fair and treats everyone fairly and equally, but with an understanding of where they are coming from.
All righty, Alana?
So I think the critical question is not if you've experienced racism or if you're aware of racism, it's why has that disparity existed in the DA's office? And I think it has existed because we have limited action to some training. And we don't know who has been providing the training or how effective. Is there any measurement to say, where were we before we had this training and where were we afterwards? So there's been no measurement of movement. So as the next district attorney, what I would do is mark the metrics. And you can do that in a couple of ways. First, by having a data dashboard where you're being transparent about who you're charging, what are the demographics, and you can see if there are any trends. And that's available for public view as well. I also think that as DA, I would implement blind charging. You're right. Everyone knows that everyone has biases. And I'm a professor, so I teach implicit bias in the law. I'm also on the faculty of American Leadership Forum, teaching implicit bias and doing these trainings. And what I always say is bias is the water. It's not the shark. It's what we do with those biases. So we have to have a measurement in place, not about what's going on in some community organization, but what's going on in the DA's office to address those biases and set up a framework. One thing that can be done, the Stanford Computation Lab has an algorithm that allows DA's offices to do blind charging so that you redact all of the racial identification and you're just looking at the individual and what are the charges. And that is a way to address those systemic biases. We know in our broader society, we have systemic and structural problems, which means we're going to have systemic and structural solutions. And having that data dashboard, having that algorithm are two tools that we can use that despite anyone's biases, we're not just leaving it up to them, but we're putting a framework in place to address those disparities and disrupt the bias.
All righty, moving on now to our second preset question that came from community members. And Alana, we'll start this one with you. Community members want an expansion of diversion and restorative justice programs. What do you think about creating a specific restorative justice program for people under the age of 26? And what would your plan be to implement that program?
Thank you. So I want to just add that this is not the first time that I've been thinking about this. I think it's an excellent idea, and it is long overdue for Sacramento County to have a restorative justice program. When I was in law school, I actually graduated and got my JD. I went back and got an LLM, and my thesis was actually on restorative justice, and it followed the Gacaca courts, which was modeled out of the courts in Rwanda when they were working on racial healing after the Rwandan genocides. And that is a form of communal courts. Gacaca means low grass, so it was actually on the plains where they would kind of mete out justice. And so I have an idea to have community courts for low-level offenders. I don't think we should limit restorative justice programs to just youth, but I think it's certainly effective there. And I've also proposed, which you can see on my website, youth court, whereas we would divert youth from the criminal justice system into a youth court where the youth is the jury, the prosecutor, the defense. So it's a win-win situation, because not only do they have an alternative accountability model, but they actually get to see themselves in roles of lawyers. And so it builds a pathway out of other experiences and out of poverty that they've had. The last thing I would say was most important about a restorative justice program is that you have to acknowledge the harm, you have to commit to not committing the harm in the future, and you have to do what you can to restore the person you have harmed. So that program is appropriate when you have two parties, and it takes intense training to have that. But I have the experience where I've already worked in a restorative justice program to bring a successful program here to California and Sacramento County.
All right, Thien, time now for your answer to this question.
You know, the question asks if we should have a form of restorative court for those 26 and under. And my response to that is, why are we limiting it to 26 and under? It should be unlimited in terms of age, and not just to those that are under that age. We should afford that opportunity to a person regardless of their age. We need to look at a situation where we have nonviolent offenders and going through a neighborhood court. And of the candidates that are running for district attorney, I was the first one to propose a restorative neighborhood court. It was my proposal initially to have that very thing in Sacramento. And I'm not just putting it on my website. I've actually gone and talked to one of the individuals that's in charge in Yolo County of running the neighborhood court, the restorative court in Yolo County, the community-based organization, and working with her and trying to learn, first of all, the model that they're using in Yolo, which is successful because the recidivism rate in that program is less than traditional prosecution for those nonviolent offenses. And how do we bring that to Sacramento? How do we fund it? How do we work it? And so it's not just something I'm putting on a website, but it's something that I am actively in my position working to bring to Sacramento and finding the information and the research and finding the partners that will run that program successfully. And it starts with accountability to the victim, to make sure that the victim is heard and that the victim is restored. So as we go through this process of restorative courts, we always have to remember the victim and that they are restored to justice, but give the offender or the person who is in that program an opportunity at rehabilitation and redemption as well.
And Thien, we will start with you for our third question. And it is 92% of people who receive gang enhancements in California are people of color. State Assembly Bill 333 seeks to address these harms by making changes to the law in order to reduce harmful and racist application in criminal cases. How do you plan to approach so-called gang-related cases, including gang enhancements and charges?
No, in regards to that statistic, about 92% of individuals that face gang enhancements being Black, brown, or Asian, we also have to look at the other side of that coin, which is that 92% or an extremely high percentage of victims of gang violence are also from communities of color. And we need to make sure that we address that and make sure that the victims of those crimes, often from communities of color, Black, brown, and Asian, and I've been a victim of gang violence, to make sure that the voices are heard, that they feel safe in their community. Now, in regards to AB 333, you will see most definitely a reduction in the application of gang enhancements. And one of the things that we need to do, and not just react to a crime afterwards, because if you have somebody engaging in a gang shooting, a gang homicide, there's accountability there. There's responsibility there. There's making sure that the community is safe, that the victim obtains justice. But we can't just be reacting to crime. What we also need to be doing is working upstream to prevent the crimes that will occur later in time, downstream, to prevention and intervention crimes, to try to stop the school to prison pipeline, stop young people from getting into gangs in the first place, so that we're not just reacting to crime, but we're being preventative on it as well. And I think those things are very important. And that's why I've been working in the community with community-based organizations to try to do just that.
All righty, Alana, your answer here?
Yeah, so they say imitation is the best form of flattery. And I have to point out that there has been a very strong attempt to imitate some of the policies that I put forward. It's very important for those who are watching, not just to listen to what we're saying, but to look on the record. You know, it is unfathomable how, if someone has been in a position of community prosecution, why are we now just having the idea for restorative justice? And why now, if there has been a history and decades of gang crimes that have been prosecuted or an experience, is there now just an effort to look at that? I think that that experience should have been very insightful to see that a lot of times those individuals have experienced that trauma. And then the question is, what are you doing about it? And so we can't change what we're not acknowledging and what we don't recognize. And that is that percentage of disparity. The spirit of AB 33 was to address the disparities because it was being used, gang enhancements, under low-level offenses, which is why the Commission on the Revision to the Penal Code made the recommendation that then Senator or Assemblymember Kamlager-Dove used to make the law. So we have to look at those same underlying causes and address that. It's not just about in the bill, but it's about how we go about and work. And what we have seen in Sacramento County is that there have not been efforts of prevention. That's why crime is exploding. That's why it's such spikes. So we can't just have the rhetoric for political points now in a debate. We have to look at the reality of what we are facing. And it doesn't happen by mentioning 3 people who run 2 programs in one neighborhood. It happens when you have the leadership in the community. It happens when you understand what types of programs are effective and are working. And I've done that work with mentoring women and men who have been on parole. I've done that work with mentoring at-risk youth, and I will do that work by implementing and training on AB 333 to make sure we are not using those enhancements in a way that is perpetuating these disparities.
All righty, thank you so much. Now we're going to move on to the 4th question that was provided ahead of time to the candidates. Again, sourced from the community. Better data collection, tracking, and reporting are critical steps for community transparency and accountability. What plans do you have to collect, track, and report online in a way that is easily accessible to the public? Statistical information regarding felony and misdemeanor charging decisions, convictions, and diversion placements disaggregated by race, age, and zip code of residence. Alana.
Yeah, so I think I answered that. I alluded to that in my earlier question, is having that data dashboard is a way that you can have that information transparent. I've heard from members of the NAACP, of which I am a member of the Criminal Justice Committee, say that they have requested that information from the Sacramento County DA's office and they have been denied. So I'm not going to wait until it's requested to me. We're talking about being reactive. I will be proactive and I will actually make that available. And then I want to go back to that last question, because it did have an important point of what would I do to handle that approach as the DA. Well, when I was a DA, I had a gang-related case, and I didn't have to have gang enhancements to use to hold that offender accountable. It was an attempt murder case, and I had gang and related evidence that was able to introduce, and that person received life without the possibility of parole. Because they had a strike, it was doubled. So they received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. So there is a way to hold serious and violent offenders, even in gang-related cases, accountable without perpetuating that disparity. And additionally, in addition to that, you can train and you can make sure that that's available. So using the data dashboard, that's how I plan to make it transparent and more available.
And Thien, your response to this question about data collection and making it transparent for everyone.
I think having a data portal is important, and I think it's something that we should have. And in addition to not just having it, one of the proposals I have is to have a diverse advisory council, because having the data is just one thing, but then taking that data and having an advisory council look through that data and coming up with essentially a recommendation in terms of how to deal with that data, look at that data is important. But I want to go back to 2 things real quick. My opponent a moment ago talked about handling a gang case and how the defendant that she had two prior strikes, and as a result of those 2 prior strikes received life without the possibility of parole. I think this is an important point here. You can only get life without the possibility of parole, LWOP, if you have a special circumstance allegation charge, such as a murder with a rape, such as multiple murders. You can't get that with just 2 strikes. So I'm not sure what case my opponent is talking about, but that is simply an impossibility under the law. You cannot receive that. And this is why the position of district attorney is important and why experience is important. I'm an experienced prosecutor, having supervised the gang unit, having tried gang cases, homicide cases, special circumstance cases. So I know that when you can apply LWOP and when you can't. And I can tell you right now that that case that my opponent had that she handled, where there were just 2 strikes, it's an impossibility under the law to have received LWOP. Simply impossible.
I'd like to address that because we have a misstatement of facts and I need to clear that up. I did not say the person had LWOP because of 2 prior strikes. What I said is they received a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, but because they had a strike, that was doubled to 2 life sentences. So when you're in the position of DA, it is very important to get the facts and the evidence straight. So I will clear the record and share that this was an attempt murder with a special circumstance of premeditation, which is why that person got life without the possibility of parole. Thank you for the opportunity to clear the record and not have anything I'm saying being misrepresented.
And let me clarify this. On attempted murder, you cannot have a special circumstance allegation. That's an impossibility under the law. Having tried homicide cases and special circumstances, you cannot have a special circumstance allegation to an attempted murder. It only applies to a murder. And having tried those cases, charged those cases, litigated those cases, that's important to know. So when it comes to the qualification of being the district attorney and having that experience, I just want to point that out.
Alrighty, I was going to say, we're going to have to move on to our 5th preset question. It's an issue that everybody in the community can look up and research for themselves and continue to question these 2 candidates on their various websites and other various platforms. This is our 5th question from the community. In Sacramento County, roughly 21,000 adults and 1,700 youth are on probation. Black people make up 31% of people on probation, despite representing just 11% of the county's entire population. How do you plan to limit the number of people under supervision and minimize the long-term harms of mass incarceration? And I believe before we had that little exchange that Thien was the last person who was speaking. So Thien, we begin this one with you.
There's been recent changes in regards to the probationary period. So on a felony, probation is now a year. For misdemeanors, it's 6 months. And in regards to the probation period, I would note that juvenile probation, in terms of the period for that, is up to the judge. The judge has tremendous discretion with that. And I think when it comes to probation, one of the things that we really have to evaluate is really having the services, whether it's reentry, whether it's risk and need assessment, whether it's wraparound services as it's connected with the probation department. So I think it's important to have sufficient probation period so that we can have that supervision and the assistant, because when somebody gets let out of jail, there's a risk need assessment that is done at that point. And one of the proposals I have is to move that risk need assessment earlier in the criminal justice system process before they're convicted, so that we can have somebody follow the case along. For example, if it's a mental health issue, if it's a drug addiction issue, that we can address that early on. But I think probation can be utilized in a way where we provide services, supervision in a way that can help people rather than hurt people. And in the process, reduce crime and also protect the community and serve the community in that sense.
All righty, Alana.
So I go back again to say that I believe that these statistics represent some of the structural and systemic problems that we have, and it's going to require systemic and structural solutions. So let's just say of the 31% of Black people who are on probation, let's just say a significant number of them on felony probation. And this is important to note, because when you're talking about not just being reactive, but having prevention and intervention strategies, this is the substance that goes to it, not just kind of like the imitation rhetoric of copying it, is that you have to realize that that person now on felony probation thus has a felony conviction. So it's hard for them to get a job. If they can't get a job, they can't get money to pay for housing or other needs. And if they can't take care of their basic needs, they're more vulnerable to commit more violence. So we have to look at this cycle and stop just reacting. We're reacting when we're waiting for them to leave jail or waiting for them to get an assessment. If we have the information in place that deals with the services that they will need, then we know what they can do before they get out of jail, and we can work and be in the seat to provide those services so that we're actually intervening and preventing crime. That's what we need to do. We don't need to just highlight the data and say, oh, well, now you're getting out of jail, we're going to do this assessment, whether it's before you're in jail or after you're in jail or at the whole process. It's still too late because the harm has been caused and you're already. So if we have that factor to know what's going to be successful, we need to apply it at the front end. And that's how you get to ending the rates of mass incarceration and the harms that have been caused, which goes to the direct question that was asked.
All righty. And that completes our section with the community member questions that were provided to the candidates ahead of time. Lots of people still joining because this is a virtual event, and that is the beauty of people continuing to enter the room and listen. We want to remind everybody that the SAC for the People Coalition does not support or oppose either one of these candidates. This is a nonpartisan event that is about voter education, giving you the chance to listen to what they have to say, to questions that have come from the community. And now we're moving on to 3 questions that have come from the people who actually registered for this forum today, as opposed to the entire community at large. And Alana, we're going to start with you on this one. The question is, quote, I am still disappointed that the officers who shot Stephon Clark and Joseph Mann were not charged. Please describe the process for district attorneys to open closed cases. Do you think the process of reopening cases could apply to the shooting of Stephon Clark or Joseph Mann?
So the process of reopening cases, it involves a lot of different components, such as there are new evidence, is there relevant information, or laws that would be relevant to reopening that case. So I think that would apply to any case, not just those 2 cases, but anytime you receive new evidence or new information that is relevant and critical to the review, that the DA in the pursuit of justice should always be willing. While I have not made any comments, because I don't know the exact evidence that was actually reviewed, I wasn't privy to that in the Stephon Clark case. I think that's a different situation than the Joseph Mann case, because there was video evidence that was released. And in addition to that, we also had the statement of then Chief Daniel Hahn, who called the actions of one of the officers, said that it was inexcusable neglect of duty, constituted incompetence, willful disobedience of a lawful order or direction, a disruption and discredit to his employment and public service. When you have that type of evidence or statement from the chief of police saying that the line has crossed, it is unexplainable why the DA's office did not agree. So I would say that I've already been very public in asking for the Attorney General to review the Joseph Mann case, and I think it's appropriate there. And so I'll leave it at that.
All righty, Thien, same question.
In regards to reopening a case, in certain situations, cases are reopened when you have newly developed credible evidence that was not available previously. And those situations, those cases, circumstances review. I think each case is unique and different as to the facts and the circumstances of them. The 2 cases that you mentioned, both of them were reviewed by the DA's office. Both of them have an opportunity to, at least in one situation, reviewed by the Attorney General of the state of California and the Department of Justice on a federal level. And I believe that if there is new and credible evidence developed, then each case will be looked at individually itself.
All right, moving on to the second question coming from community members who registered for today's forum. And Thien, this will start with you. Communities are concerned with the potential conflicts of interest between the district attorney's office and law enforcement. How would you describe the relationship between the two agencies? How will you as DA ensure that the relationship between the DA's office and law enforcement does not interfere with objectively prosecuting a case that involves police misconduct?
You know, whether or not a person wears a blue uniform or blue jeans, whether or not a person's on probation, parole, or a police officer, the law should apply equally to everybody. You should look at the facts in the law, and that's what you make your decision on, the facts in the law. It should apply to everybody equally. And if a police officer violates the law, they should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. You know, most recently, we did prosecute an individual, a police officer, for using excessive force. That case went to trial. The person was convicted and they are being held responsible. And it is my position that, again, regardless of your profession and what you do for violate the law, you're going to face the consequences of the law, pure and simple.
All righty, Alana?
Yeah, so I want to talk about the relationship between the DA and law enforcement. It's a necessary one, a necessary partnership for public safety. Anybody who's watched the episode of Law and Order, they explain that very well. The officers investigate the case and the DA's office prosecutes them. But that partnership only works when we have the trust of the community, because the community is where our witness is, where people corroborate that work that we want to lead to public safety and justice. And so you compromise that safety and trust when you get a financial kickback. And that's why I have not accepted donations, unlike my opponent, from law enforcement associations, because I think it's very critical. We are at a time when there's deep distrust in the community. So when I have to make a decision as DA based on, the law and the facts, and it's to justify use of force for an officer, I want the community to have that confidence that it is based on the law and facts, and it's not because I'm getting any financial contribution or kickbacks. And although there's been one example of an officer, being prosecuted, it's very disheartening to learn that that is not always the case across the board. And we have a recent example in which the Sacramento County DA's office, after having information that an officer had beat his wife, pulled a gun, had threatened her, said he was gonna, have her body disposed of in the lake, no charges were prosecuted. It wasn't until 3 months later, 3 months where she had been subjected to still getting beat, 3 months that she had gone unprotected. She was in San Francisco and another assault occurred. And it was only after they made an arrest of that particular individual that then the Sacramento DA's office decided to make an arrest of that individual. So I think that relationship has to be protected, obviously, because you work together, but it can't be compromised with financial contributions.
All righty, thank you. And now we are going to have our third question from the community, folks that registered for today's event and submitted ahead of time. And Alana, we'll start with you on this one. What role and responsibility does the DA have to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them? How do you balance keeping people safe while ensuring not to over-criminalize community members?
So it has a very, very critical role. That's why it's one of my top 3 priorities, as I mentioned, gun violence, violence against women, and then having effective alternatives for low-level offenders. There are 3 things that the DA can do. 1, we need to get guns out of the hands of people who are not supposed to have them, and that includes abusers. So when there is a restraining order, we want to make sure that we're getting, but I want to place a team of attorneys to work with service agencies, not just the domestic violence cases that come through the DA's office, but the service agencies that serve domestic violence victims, to make sure we are enforcing. The second thing we can do is focus on ghost guns. In the 2 shootings, high profile shootings we've seen in this community, it was involving ghost guns. And so I would join in the efforts of the Attorney General. There's also legislation being offered by Assemblyman Mike Gibson, to deal with ghost guns. And then the third thing we can do is educate the community community on our red flag laws, which means that anyone who has a family member who is not mentally stable or for whatever reason they should not be able to have a gun, we can empower and educate them to go through the legal process to remove that gun when it has a high potential of escalating and threatening public safety for everyone.
All right, Thien.
Gun violence is an epidemic that we are facing, not only in Sacramento, but throughout the state of California and the entire country as well. And we're talking about gun violence, and I have to refrain from talking about any specific case or even referencing any pending case because there's a rule of professional conduct for prosecutors. And frankly, it should also apply to those who are running for district attorney. But in regards to gun violence, it's extremely important. So we have a unit in the DA's office that targets particularly gun possession, gun violence, especially as it relates to gangs as well. One of the statistics that we have, a correlation that we have had and have been aware of for many years, is the connection between domestic violence and those that commit violent offenses, especially with guns. And for many of the viewers may not know this, but domestic violence is not considered a violent crime under the laws of the state of California. And for 7 years, we have advocated that domestic violence be a violent crime. And I would also want to inquire to make sure that my opponent agrees that domestic violence should be a violent crime, and we should change the law in regards to that. But in addition to that, one of the things that we do is we work hand in hand in terms of doing a risk assessment for those that should relinquish those guns. We work with the sheriff's department that has a unit that serves those restraining orders and get those guns and remove those guns from individuals, whether it's through a search warrant, an arrest in that moment. And we'll continue to do that. And I've asked the Board of Supervisors in my office has for additional funding for more prosecutors so we can continue to work and expand on that very thing. And we also have programs relating to young kids and juveniles and students in terms of gun awareness and what happens with guns. But we most definitely need more funding to effectuate that. But domestic violence should be a violent felony so we can hold those accountable so that we protect those who are victims and also protect the public as well.
All right, now we're going to be moving on to sort of our live questions, things that are just coming in from folks who are gathered listening to today's forum. And Thien, we're going to start with you on this one. Often getting elected becomes a bigger goal than like really affecting change. How willing are you to run the DA's office by your values, even if it means facing opposition or possibly being unseated in the future?
You know what? The thing that I say is, it's about safety, not politics. I'm not a politician. I've never run for office before this. I haven't even run for class president. And so this is the first time I've ever sought public office. And the reason is it's about service over self. Coming to this country gave me everything in my family, everything we could ever hope for. So I'm not a career politician. I don't care about politics. I just want to serve our community. In terms of working collaboratively with many different people, I was endorsed by a union that represents both the public defender's office and the DA's office, and that union overwhelmingly endorsed me. I've been endorsed by 12 retired judges. A sitting judge cannot endorse a political candidate, but 12 judges, both on the Superior Court and the Appellate Court, the District Court of Appeal, have endorsed me. I've been endorsed by defense attorneys, including prominent defense attorneys like Johnny Griffith III, one of the most prominent and best criminal defense attorneys in town. I work collaboratively with many different groups. I've been endorsed, by example, by Mervyn Brookins. And it isn't just like I started a couple months ago working with that organization, but for years now, working with the community, working with his organization and other organizations to really intervene and prevent. But it's about working together with diverse groups. And I have demonstrated that, not at the Energy Commission or in climate change, but in the criminal justice realm, at the district attorney's office, dealing with the issues that this job and this position deals with.
All righty, Alana.
Sorry, if you can just give me a moment. I think I'm having some issues because of my lighting.
Can you hear us though?
Yes, I can, but I just, I think I need to move my camera.
For anybody just joining, we've now moved on to sort of the live segment of this particular forum. This is on racial equity and restorative justice. And so audience members right now are submitting questions. And now, Alana, I think we have you back. We can see you. So we're going to have you answer the same question.
And I know that we got those questions before, but can you repeat just that question since that's a new one?
Actually, this is the live list coming in, but often elected officials, being elected rather, becomes a bigger goal than affecting change. How willing are you to run the DA's office by your values, even if it means facing opposition or possibly being unseated in the future?
Yeah, so I think that's an important question, and I will run the office that way. I've run my campaign that way. That's why I won't give you a list of all the people who like me or supported or voted for me, because that question really goes to the heart of how do you deal with people who don't support you and have not had a pleasant experience with you. And my experience goes to when I was public advisor of the California Energy Commission, where I brought stakeholders together from different sides, environmentalists, industry, enviros, community members who didn't want a power plant in their backyard. So that experience is very relevant because I got to bring people who were on opposing sides together. And the way that I did that is that I don't lead by issues. I lead by values. And my values as the Sacramento County District Attorney will be safety, fairness, and justice. So that means I'm always going to be asking those questions. I'm going to be looking at the data and doing the research and saying, is this going to make us more safe? If it's going to make our system more fair, is it going to achieve more justice? You know, my opponent asked the question, he wants me to know if I'm going to see domestic violence as a violent crime. And I would submit that he should ask his boss that question. I just gave you a case where we had an officer who had committed egregious acts of domestic violence and was not charged, not in May, not in June, not in July. It was only until after August. If you look at the death review team of the 4,900 cases that have been referred to the DA's office, less than half were prosecuted last year. So we need a leader who's courageous enough to call out failures in keeping people safe. And I'm doing that now, and I will do it when I run or when I am district attorney, because I think the people of Sacramento deserve a leader who can be courageous and committed to doing so.
Our next question has to do with a topic that brings up safety concerns for a lot of people. A number of the questions coming in right now are about homelessness. Now, what are your thoughts, Alana? We will start with you on this one, about the growing homeless crisis, and what role does the DA's office play in the homeless crisis?
Yeah, so I think we have to first see the context that the DA's office plays, and it is where homelessness overlaps with the criminal justice system. And we see that that has been an issue that's primarily been ignored by the DA's office. You may hear rhetoric that they've been involved, but we don't see the results of that. You look outside, you know, we had a debate earlier this week, and my opponent talked about going to San Francisco to talk to a homeless person, where you can just go right here. And I did that in a point in time. And what I learned is the point in time count is that we have disabled, women escaping violence. We have transgender youth, foster youth, disabled veteran, the elderly, veterans. So we have to have targeted solutions, not just assuming that there are a monolith and not just assuming that they're all experiencing mental health or substance abuse. Certainly those are issues that address some of the concerns of those experiencing homelessness, but it doesn't apply to all of them. So we're only going to be effective when we have those targeted solutions, or else we're just going to be cycling people through the jail. That is ineffective, expensive, and it doesn't work.
All righty, Thien.
First of all, the homeless crisis, and it is a crisis as you look out there. And I've spent time, not just doing a point in time, but I've spent time in Sacramento County, out in Miller Park, talking to homeless and unhoused people. And if you notice, I'm about to give some very specific things and plans how to deal with the homeless crisis versus not answer the question. So I want to provide a couple of things that we've been working on and that we continue to work on. So we have a core program at the DA's office. And that core program is this, that if a person, and there's an intersection there when somebody's committed a crime and they happen to be homeless, and they may have a series of offenses, whether it's trespassing, battery, whether it's theft, whatever it is, those crimes, and they're in jail and they're in custody, they're homeless. What we do instead of offering to criminalize homelessness and keep them in jail is to get them to a drug treatment program. And we had such an individual from Rancho Cordova, and they were transported when they accepted a drug treatment program over into that drug treatment. And if they're successful, they finish it, they don't go back to jail, they don't do a day in jail at all. Now, what we need to work with, and where our partners from the community, is get them transitional housing. But when it comes to getting the drug treatment and the mental health treatment, because those are key factors in dealing with homelessness that we cannot ignore. But we're doing more, and we can do more. And these are the specifics that I'm actually providing the listeners on what we're doing. So one of the things that happen is people getting released from the jail at 10 o'clock at night. If they happen to be homeless, if they happen to be suffering from a mental health crisis, they're not getting services. So what did I do? I actually pulled together a coalition from the Board of Supervisors, Behavioral Health, Probation, the Public Defender's Office, and the Sheriff's Department, so that we're putting somebody in the jail from behavioral health to do an assessment before they're let out. I've also working with community-based organizations to establish a 24-hour reception area where they're transported over, get temporary housing, wraparound services, and a warm handoff where they're not just given a note, show up at this appointment, but actually taken there. So these are specific ideas rather than vague slogans and terms.
All righty, thank you very much. All righty, let's move on to our next question. According to a 2021 crime report, violent crime, we're talking about homicide, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault in Sacramento is more than double that of more densely populated areas like San Francisco and Los Angeles. But our current DA, Anne-Marie Schubert, has openly criticized the DAs of both of those counties. What policies will you implement to affect observable change in our county so that we are no longer known for violent crime? And will you support our current DA, Anne-Marie Schubert's run for Attorney General? Thien?
So in regards to the violent crimes that have increased, there are a series of factors and reasons behind why that's the case. You have everything from the changes in the law to the parole, the releases of individual. But in addition, you have the social economic issues that have been compounded by COVID as well, and the impact that that has had in terms of the explosion on crime. Oftentimes and that also, in addition, is addressed by zero bail, by issues where we are having the need for reentry services and funding for those reentry services. In regards to what to do and what to continue to do, all the things we've talked about so far, which is making sure that it starts with accountability, with holding those who are committing those crimes accountable, whether it's domestic violence, making it a violent crime, which what we need to do because there's a correlation to that and other crimes, but also our prevention and intervention as well. And in regards to the question, and I was asked this question previously in regards to the support of Anne-Marie Schubert for the Attorney General position. And when I was asked that question about a month ago, I said, and what I say continue to say now, which is this, is I have a pretty good idea of my personal choice that I'm going to make in regards to that election. But ultimately, whether I release that personal choice is my personal choice. I think ultimately the decision about who is going to be the Attorney General of the state of California will be ultimately decided by the 20 million voters of the state of California that will vote in that election. At the end of the day, regardless of whoever it is that is the Attorney General, I will continue to be able to work well with them, collaborate with them to make sure that our community is safe in all aspects.
All righty, Alana?
So let me start by saying that if you choose service over self, your self-interest should recognize why that question is being asked, because people want to know if we're going to have a continuation of the status quo. And so, no, I will not be supporting our current DA for Attorney General because I think we need a change. And if we need a change in the county level, certainly we don't want to go backwards on the state level. So I have no political reasons or self-interested reasons of denying the voters of Sacramento County to know what direction I think that we should be going in. With regard to the rise in crime, again, this is a reflection of critical opportunities that have been missed or ignored in our county, which is why it's going up. There have been other jurisdictions that have had programs and models with regard to domestic violence, and they've seen better results. So going back to the assertion that we have an accountability problem, I would challenge that, because I don't think when we look at some of the violent crimes and the shootings that have happened, there has been a history of domestic violence. in the background of those individuals. So before violence has spread out into the streets, it has happened behind closed doors. And that's not an accountability problem. That's a not believing women, particularly women of color, when they warn about dangerous men problem. And that's what we have to address, so that if we want to hold someone accountable and there's information to show that they've not only assaulted an individual, they kidnapped them, they've committed a burglary, then we need to hold them accountable while we have them in the courtroom. The problem with saying we got to change policies or we got to make a certain crime about, we're talking about changing the law. So that's a process that has to go through the legislation. People are dying now. We need someone who is going to lead and affect change now, not play the blame game, not wait on legislation, but do the work right now.
All righty, thank you so much for those comments on that question. You both sound passionate about creating a system that serves everyone equally and undoing the injustices that have already been done to people of color. This question from the audience is, quote, "My question is, despite who wins, will you both be willing to continue to work with each other to help bring this change about?" And Alana, we'll start with you on this one.
Absolutely. I knew Mr. Ho before, we both got to the DA's office at about the same time. I was there a little bit after him, but we worked together briefly in the misdemeanor unit. I do have respect for him, so I would continue to be able to work well with him. But it's not about my relationship with Mr. Ho. It's about the direction that I think Sacramento County needs to go into. It's about bringing effective solutions to this county to deal with the rising crime, the violence against women, and the cycling of those who are experiencing homelessness, substance abuse, and mental illness through the jail. That's really what this is about. And again, I lead by values, not by issues. And so we may agree on issues, but hopefully we do share the same values. And for that reason, I think we would still be able to work together well.
All righty, Thien.
Absolutely. I've known Alana for many years, even before we ended up running for the same position. And I'll continue to work with her. I'll continue to work with people that, whether they vote for me, support me, agree with me, disagree with me, I think we all learn from each other. We all learn from each other. We all learn from each other's life experience, each other's values and experiences. And those voices need to be heard and to be recognized. And I think we can lift each other up. One of the things I'm fond of saying, and I truly believe it, is this: a rising tide lifts all ships. A rising tide lifts all ships. We all lift each other up. And at the end of the day, we all live in the same community, working in the same community, raising our children in the same community, worshiping in the same community, enjoying ourselves in the same community. And we can lift it up together. And that's what's important. So I'm sure that during the election, after the election, we all need to work together. And I'm positive that we will all work together.
Today's audience still providing lots and lots of questions, lots of things they want to know from the both of you. Thien, we'll start with you on this one. Somebody in the audience is asking that you please define your view of racial equity and restorative justice and what role the DA's office plays in that.
In regards to restorative justice and equity and equality, is making sure that we apply the law equally and fairly to everybody, without politics, without bias, without prejudice. But that we also, in the process, look at the individual, look at a case individually, in that they're not just a name or a number. And in terms of restoring justice or making sure that we have engagement from the community, there are things such as, for example, having an advisory council, people from different communities together. But in addition to that, really having a restorative court where you bring together the victim and the other person together. And it has to be mutual. It has to be by way of consent. It can't be forced. And doing it in a way that is empathetic, a way that provides justice and accountability, but making sure that the voices of all are heard and engaging in the community. The neighborhood court that I've proposed isn't one run by the DA's office. Actually, it's run by the neighborhood. It's run by the neighborhood and community leaders that have gone through the training and the process and the community-based organizations. Now, obviously, the case gets referred from the DA's office because that's the general process. These cases come from the police, from law enforcement to the DA's office, but then it goes to there. And then it's up to the neighborhood courts and those who run it and the community to shape that form of justice, to make sure that the victim is heard and the victim is made whole again, and make sure that there is public safety and accountability, but that there is heard. And so that's part of that process. And I think it's important to have that process there.
All righty, Alana.
So as I mentioned before, I've been involved in restorative justice projects before. I've actually done that. And there are three main components. The first component is that you have to have a person who has acknowledged the harm. When you have punishment or you just go to prison, we never know what happens to an individual if they've done any self-reflection. So restorative justice first has the component of recognizing the harm. The second is a restorative justice component has it requires that you try to address the harm. And in that way, you really center the voices of victim or the person who has been harmed, because you have to understand what is it going to take for them to be made whole. And then it might be a requirement. And then the third part of restorative justice is to have a commitment to not commit further harm in the future. And so, when I've talked to people who have, transformed their lives, or even those who are working in probation, this is very hard and difficult work. If you just think about, you may have been running late to go to a meeting because you were watching television or something, and then you have to explain to that person. A lot of people might make something up because they are embarrassed to say, oops, I did something that didn't show. So can you imagine if you've caused traumatic harm to someone's life and then having to own up and work through that? So it takes a lot of work. So that's what a restorative justice means to me. It means having those three components. And then racial equity, it means addressing past harms and disrupting future harms in the past. So it's not just about treating everybody equally, because everyone doesn't have the same opportunity. You have to look at specifically what have been the harms. So if you have a war on drugs policy where certain people have been targeted, equality or being equitable means addressing that specifically, and not having blinders on and just say, okay, we're everybody. And I'm sure everyone has seen that little diagram between equality and equity. And so that's what it means to me, is that we have to really address past harms.
All righty. Alana, we'll start this next question from the audience with you. Early custodial release is a delicate balance on the spectrum of justice. How do you balance compassion and accountability in making decisions about early release?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about early release, at that point, the DA's office is being reactive. You are simply making an objection or making a recommendation. I think early release question is better answered when the DA's office has authority. And so when you have an individual in front of you and you're making sure the measure of accountability is happening. And this brings up another issue, which is called truth in sentencing, that I think is really important. And so we make sure that the community, as well as survivors and victims, understand what a sentence usually means. So if it's 10 years and they're going to get day for day credit, and it's really only going to be 5 years, or if it's, some other underlying offense where they're not doing 50% of the time, maybe 80 or 85, whatever it may be. I won't go into the complexities of that now, but I think it's important. But as the DA, you have to recognize where you have the most authority. And that's why it's important not just to talk about, and focusing on, saying, oh, domestic violence is this part, and we got, you really have to have accountability in the courtroom when you have that offender in front of you, and make sure that the sentence that they have is going to be appropriate for the harm that they have caused into the community.
Thien?
As somebody who's prosecuted homicide cases, gang shootings and crimes and sex crimes, I've sat there and held the hands of many victims and survivors, and watch seeing the pain in their faces and hear the pain in their voice. I've also been there with a mother who child was molested, and now the child molester is about to get parole from prison. And I have to sit there with the mother of this child and talk about and try to recommend to the Board of Prison and Parole not to release this person. So it's not just being reactive, it's being a voice and amplifying that voice for these victims and survivors. It's not reactive, it's being proactive and representing and making sure that there is accountability on that end and public safety, and that the voices of victims are always heard. The other thing is that when you have people that are released from prison, one of the things that we need to do, or jail, you need to have those reentry services to make sure that they are supervised, that they are on parole, that there are wraparound services, and that they're not just dropped off somewhere without any services, without any supervision, because then it's just setting somebody up for failure, and it's setting up our society and public safety for failure. But it's not being reactive, it's being proactive and defending the rights of victims and survivors of crime.
Alrighty, we just want to let everybody know, candidates included, we're going to go until about 3:20 and get in as many of these questions from the audience that we can. If you see me looking off or down, that's what I'm doing. I'm monitoring the questions. And then we will have closing statements by both of our candidates. So we're going to continue on now. And Thien, you will start this one. What is your view on the perspective that the criminal justice system incarcerates just too many people? What will you do specifically to reduce criminalization and incarceration?
I think that one of the things that we need to do is really invest in and continue to work, not just at the DA's office, but throughout government. And that's city council, it's board of supervisors, it's the legislature, but it's all of us in regards to prevention and intervention and education. I think those things are very important. Now, the DA's office, we normally get involved in a case when it comes to the criminal prosecution of a case, but I think that there is a role, and there is a role for prevention and intervention. The DA's office here, we have 10 different sort of programs in regards to alternative courts and collaborative courts, so that we divert people away from essentially jail. One of those programs that we have is Veterans Court, where you have a veteran who's suffering from, let's say, PTSD, and it's a result of the service that they gave to our country, and then it directly affects them in terms of committing their crime. So what we do is we work with the VA, we work with the veteran, we work with getting them a mentor so that they graduate from the program. And it's not just a diversion of that, now they plea and they don't get jail time, it's actually a dismissal. We have an 83% success rate. But there are also things that we need to do in regards to DUIs. We have a DUI drug treatment court that deals with that. And those are people with 4 or more DUI offenses. But that's why I propose to go beyond those and establish a restorative court for our juveniles and for adults as well. And a mentorship and apprenticeship program in our juvenile system is really important to expand upon that, so that they have some sort of pathway besides the school to prison pipeline, or to move away from gangs. So I think it's really important, the prevention and intervention. And those are the things that I think we can all do and all work together and all get funding for and developed. And I've discussed and working with the business, the trades, the building trades, to do just that for juveniles. So I think these are important areas that I think we can most definitely expand on, continue to work on. And that's how we can move towards prevention and intervention, which is something that I think here agree with.
Time.
Alana, time now for your answer to this question.
So it really starts with addressing the root causes of crime. So when I have been saying since the beginning of this campaign is that we need more than just to react to crime by prosecuting it in a courtroom, but we need to work on preventing crime in the community with our intervention strategies. This is what I mean. So now that I see that my language has been kind of hijacked and imitated, I got to really explain. Safety is on a continuum. On this end, harm has already been caused and you're reacting. At some point, you can intervene, and at another point, you can prevent it. I say this: how do you stop a 30-year-old man from beating his girlfriend? You talk to him when it's 10. So what we've seen is that tool, the number one tool in the DA's office, has been reaction to crime in the courtroom. And that's why all of these programs are either dealing with someone when they're getting released from prison, or developing a program for juveniles when they're transitioning out of the system. So they've already been impacted. What we have to have is programs that are focused on intervention and prevention, meaning you're addressing the root causes of crime. Statistics of having 83% success rate really doesn't mean anything, because we don't know how many people. Is that 5 people or 10 people? I've been told that, the chronic offender program only had 12 people. I don't know if that's what the defense attorneys are telling me. So we have to put that in some type of context to understand what it means. But more importantly, we have to look at what is it about that program that is addressing the root causes of crime. education, employment, opportunity. Mentorship is great, but what type of mentorship is it? If you're having a program that requires transportation, are you providing that transportation? What are the underlying elements and the root causes? And until you address that, if you can't have the specifics of what those collaborative courts are doing to address that, you're just going to continue to cycle people through the jail and not really transform lives. That's why my work as a mentor to women on parole, taking an AM call, has been helpful in helping me understand that.
All righty, moving on to another question from somebody in our audience. And Alana, this one will go to you first. How will you address the gaps and disparities with respect to plea deals offered and taken, especially for those who can't afford to bail out?
Yeah, that's a question that I get, and it's actually a concern that many of defense attorneys, whether they're public defenders or they're private attorneys, have shared to me that there's been a disparity, not only in those who can't afford it, but they see a disparity. They may have a client who is white and they get a different plea deal than someone of another race. That's the information that I'm getting. I think that's why that data dashboard will be helpful. And then we've got to have some way to objectively, I'm not going to have an advisory council to educate me. You actually need statisticians. You actually need data analysts. You just can't have community members who have different diverse experience. You have to have experts come in and read that data and explain those trends to you. And I think that shouldn't just expand to the charging. I think it all expand to the sentencing and the plea negotiations, that we need that sort of expert look into how we are resolving cases. And I think also we have to empower. That's what a lot of defense attorneys have shared with me too, is that the way the power structure is in the office currently is that there can't be a resolution. Deputies have to call back, even in the felony trial team, to their supervisors to kind of get approval, even if the judge agrees. So I think that we have to have a more universal or a redefined a definition of what justice is, and not necessarily wrapping it around and punishment and how we're resolving it, but looking at what does it mean that we're going to stop causing harm in the community. We're going to address the root causes so that whatever the accountability measure is, we have some confidence that it's going to address the harm that's already been caused, but it's also going to not cause more harm in the future.
All righty, Thien.
In regards to plea agreements, one of the things that is important is uniformity, making sure that people receive the same sort of offer on a case and not different offers based upon extrinsic circumstances. And one of the safeguards for doing that is if we have 175 prosecutors in the office. We're the second largest district attorney in Northern California. And so if you have 175 people making 175 offers on any given day, and let's just say that, for example, you could have 175 different results. And that's why, for example, when there's an offer that's being made, let's say on the felony teams or on the gang team, that the offer in regards to a case is a supervisor, because that supervisor has that experience. They have 10 years of experience, 15 years, 20 years of experience. They've seen the whole breadth of cases and they see all the cases in that unit so that they can have uniformity in terms of an offer in a case versus one person who gives this offer and then another person gives an offer. So one of the safeguards that we have is that in terms of having uniformity in the hands of those that are most experienced and have seen the most cases, to make sure that there is that uniformity and that fairness.
All righty, thank you so much, Thien. You will start this next question. If a person is found not guilty, what remedy can be offered to individuals who either lost employment or housing due to being in custody?
Well, in regards to being found not guilty, there's some remedies that they have. Number one is you can, and it depends very individually on the facts of the case. They can, for example, seek to have a factual finding of innocence. They can also seal their record as well in terms of the arrest record. It depends on a number of those things that you can do, but there are remedies and things to do. I know that I was recently, we have in the past worked with and talked with the NAACP and other organizations in regards to doing a sort of an expungement clinic, but program where we go through and proactively expunge cases in terms of people that are no longer probation, they've done their time. So we want to do everything we can to help people get back on their feet again, and so that they've been held accountable, they've been held responsible, and now we want people to be successful and not be held back in terms of employment in regards to perhaps a prior arrest history.
All righty. And Alana?
Yeah, I think it's critical to ask the question of not there's an interest in doing that, but why hasn't that been done? I actually work with the NAACP. They have monthly legal clinics, expungement clinics for the last several years. And so it's not understandable why that's something that is very critical in the community that hasn't been done, particularly a partnership with, let's say, the Community Prosecution Unit. The Public Defender's Office has also been a part of that. Wiley Manual Bar Association has been a part of that. There's also the Justice League. Several organizations in Sacramento County, including the NAACP, have been engaged in that type of work, but we just haven't had the leadership who has taken the time to prioritize that. And I think it's important for voters to know that when you're hearing the rhetoric and the talk about we should have prevention and intervention strategies, where has been the commitment? Where has been the action? I can tell you where I have been. In 2020, I started the Community Justice Collaborative, and one of the organizations we partnered with was the NAACP to do free expungement clinics. So I haven't waited for a position or a title or a race to run to actually do the work that is needed in the community to move people towards safety, fairness, and justice.
All righty. And Alana, we'll begin with you on this next question. We're getting kind of close to that timing when we'll have to start closing statements. But one of our audience members says, I'd like to hear if the candidates can tell us which American city's DA's office they see as a gold standard or one they want to model their office after or implement ideas from.
Well, I will say this. I have really not necessarily looked at offices, but I've looked at people who I admire, Diana Becton of Contra Costa, even Kim Fox. There's a certain level of vitriol that African-American women who are running for DA face. There is a biased assumption that because we are Black women, we saw this with Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, that we will be soft on crime or will be too lenient because of this connection of race, fear, and criminality that says Black people are more prone to crime, so they're going to be too lenient. And so I've looked to them to find the strength and stand on my own when I've been undervalued, underestimated, and dismissed. But I will say that I primarily focused on what the needs of Sacramento County are, because we're not like any other county. And I don't think that there is a model. That's why I haven't spent attention attacking other DAs in other jurisdictions or focusing on what they're doing in that jurisdiction, because we have enough problems in Sacramento County with the rise in gun violence, the increased violence against women. And we've had talk about what can be done, but we haven't seen action. So the model for me is the leadership that not only talks the talk, but they walk the walk. And that's the model for me, the model that I will follow, and the type of DA I will be is one who focuses on the solutions for Sacramento County.
All righty, Thien.
One of the things that I find really important is what you just mentioned there, and what you talk about is making sure that we walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And one of the things that I've been doing, and one of the areas that Sacramento will continue to model itself after and will continue to do, are the things that we talk about, the 10 collaborative courts that we have, about the expansion of the collaborative courts to make sure that we have more than that. But it's also community engagement with youth programs. We have 10 different youth programs, but we're going to have more than that in regards to the neighborhood court, the juvenile court, and the apprenticeship. And in terms of walking the walk, I've done that. I've sat down and worked and been in healing circles. I've worked with brother to brother and sister to sister. I've worked for years before ever even thinking about running for the DA's office, the district attorney position, but working in the community, having worked with those community-based organizations and other organizations to prevent crime, to intervene with crime, and to try to find alternative ways. And you can ask those people that I work with. You can ask, for example, Nicole Clavel, whose son was killed in a drive-by shooting, and now she's turned tragedy into triumph, and work with the City of Sacramento Violent Crime Prevention Team. So it's not just talking about it on the campaign trail or all of a sudden running for office and talk about it. I've been doing it quietly, continuously for years now in the community. And you can ask each and every one of those and other people that I've worked with. And it's important because that's what we're talking about, modeling after making sure that we have a DA's office, that we have and we continue to have one that really makes sure that all of us are safe in all of our communities.
All right, believe it or not, we have worked up to the time where both candidates need to deliver their closing statements. We began with Alana for opening statement. So Thien, your closing statement.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the opportunity and organizing this particular forum. For the last 20 years as a prosecutor, every time I've stood up, I've said Thien Ho on behalf of the people. On behalf of the people, for the people, of the people, from the people, elected by the people. And what that simply means is this, is that the district attorney is a district attorney for the people, for each and every one of you, for your children, for your family, for your friends. The district attorney is that attorney. And I have the experience. I have the experience in the courtroom, having tried nearly 100 jury trials. I have the experience of having handled homicide cases and gang shooting cases and sex offenses, the experience of holding the hands of victims and shepherding them through the darkest moments in their lives, and not just forgetting about them after the case is over, but even when the defendant is now looking at parole and making sure that justice is done, not only for the victim, but the accused as well. I have experience in the executive room, managing the budget of a DA's office of 432 employees of a DA's office, not a different agency, not a different group, but a DA's office, and having supervised hundreds of prosecutors in my career. And that experience turns into judgment, because what happens is this: it's important to know the law, to understand the law. Making a mistake in between when a special circumstance allegation can and cannot be charged, that it cannot be charged in an attempted murder case. Making sure that when you have life without the possibility, that it applies correctly to the right defendant and not to the wrong defendant. These are matters that you gain through experience. And I have those experiences, but I also have the experience in the community, having worked with many different community-based organizations to make sure that we try to intervene and prevent the school to prison pipeline, making sure that we have alternatives to prison, making sure that we prevent crimes upstream so that there is no crime downstream, making sure that we get to juveniles and kids before they join a gang, or if they've joined a gang, to try to get them out of them. So I have the experience in the executive room, in the courtroom, in the classroom, and in the community. And I would be honored to have your vote and your support. Thank you so much.
Alana, your closing statement today.
Thank you. What voters have to ask themselves is not just the question of experience, but what are the results from that experience? When you talk about every debate that I think we've had, I've heard my opponent mention 3 names of Black people that are associated with 2 programs in one neighborhood. And I think that sort of almost tokenization is not only offensive, but it demonstrates a serious lack of awareness or disregard of other people in our community who are doing just as valuable and good work. People like Barry Axios, Daniel Silva with self-awareness and recovery, Julius Thibodeau, Leah Shank, Jamila Land, Sha Bang, who's working with moms in politics, who are all working to address the root causes of crime. And they can tell you, just like I did when I mentored women on parole, and I've mentored at-risk youth like Dominique Brown, who that was a 10-year relationship where she graduated from high school, went to college, was sworn as an attorney this past February. And my second mentee, Deepak Kumar, just graduated from law school and is awaiting bar results. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the results? If you've been in the community and if you've been working, what are the results? What are the names of the people? Who have you prevented from joining a gang, or who have you worked with? We don't have that type of information. And that's what the voters need. That's the distinguishing factor. You know, I have been leading in this race simply because my resume has been the defining qualifications of what the next DA should be. And it's my resume as a former prosecutor in the courtroom, my resume as being an executive leader because I was an appointee of Governor Brown, my resume in being in a classroom, not because I'm just teaching trial advocacy course, but I've actually brought the classroom into the community and worked on an alternative to 911, worked on those at risk of being homeless, worked at low-cost legal help. It's my experience in being in the community where I've mentored women on parole, helped them achieve sobriety, and I've mentored at-risk youth. That has been the defining qualities, and that has been the results that we need as the next leader in the Sacramento County DA's office. And when we talk about the prison to the school to prison pipeline, we have two of the school districts that have the greatest level of expulsions and suspensions in the state of California. What has the DA's office done to disrupt that? What is the work that's being done? So we have to look at results, not just rhetoric. And when you do that and you look at my record in the classroom, in the courtroom, as an executive leader, as a formative prosecutor, you will see that I have the solutions and the priorities and the plan in addressing gun violence, violence against women, and making our alternative course for low-level offenders more effective to lead us in the direction that we need to go. Thank you.
Well, we have come to the end of our second forum in this race for the Sacramento County District Attorney position, the new one. First one we will have that is different since 2014. This has been just a really interesting process, and I hope a really educational process for everyone who was signed on, submitted questions, and listened today, wherever they may be in their living room, or maybe they're out at the park and took us along with them. We definitely hope so. We want to thank our candidates, Thien and Alana Mathews, for engaging this way. We know you've had a lot of different debates. This is a different kind of forum. This is nonpartisan and just completely educational for the people who will be going into ballot boxes or mailing in their ballots coming up here on June 7th. So we appreciate you coming back to this, not once, but twice, to address these different issues. We've heard so many different issues today, community members submitting questions on everything from how the DA's office can address homelessness to soliciting ideas about early release, and obviously talking about some of the high profile cases that have happened in our county that people have years old frustrations with, and trying to see what the answers may be for those cases. So thank you for being willing to address that full spectrum, and thank you to the audience members for being willing to put those questions that you've had and been brewing at home forward. We really definitely appreciate this. Now, we want to tell you that if you want to keep up with SAC for the People, that is the group that has hosted today's forum and the one that we had back in January for you, completely nonpartisan, just an educational exercise to make sure we have an informed electorate. If you want to see what they're going to do next, please follow them on Twitter and Instagram. That's SAC for the People on Instagram. You can also access their website at sacforthepeople.org. If you have any further questions about this forum, the last forum, or what's coming next, you can also email them at sacforthepeople@gmail.com. Again, thank you all so much for participating, and don't forget to vote in that primary election. When is it, folks? When? June 7th. Everybody, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.